August 6, 1945. Hiroshima, Japan. 8:14 in the morning. Takeshi Nakamura sat at his telegraph desk in the Hiroshima Communications Center. 26 years old, telegraph operator for 15 years, the best in the city. His hands moved across the telegraph key with practiced precision. Click, click, click. Morse code translating incoming messages from Tokyo. Routine military communications. Supply reports, troop movements, nothing unusual. And then the machine began receiving something different. Emergency priority. Direct from Imperial headquarters in Tokyo. Takeshi's hands froze. Emergency priority messages were rare, very rare. He had seen maybe 3 in his entire career. His fingers transcribed the incoming code automatically. Years of training making the translation instant. Letter by letter, word by word. Emperor accepts surrender terms, stop war. Ends immediately, stop. Cease all hostilities, stop broadcast to all stations, stop. Takeshi stared at the message, not believing what he was reading. The war was over. Japan had surrendered. The emperor himself had accepted Allied terms. After 4 years of fighting, after millions of deaths, it was finally over. He checked his watch, 8:14 and 30 seconds. He reached for the broadcast switch to transmit this message to every station in Western Japan. His hand was inches from the switch when he heard it. A sound like nothing he had ever heard before. A roar that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. Takeshi looked up through the window. The sky had turned white. Pure white, brighter than 1,000 suns. And then there was nothing. 140,000 people died in the next 90 seconds. 90 seconds after the telegram announcing the end of the war finally arrived in Hiroshima. This is the true story of the telegram that came too late, the message that could have saved a city. And the cruel mathematics of war, where timing is measured not in hours or minutes, but in seconds. The Supreme War Council met in an underground bunker beneath the Imperial Palace in Tokyo. 6 men who controlled Japan's fate sat around a table that had seen 4 years of increasingly desperate discussions. Emperor Hirohito sat at the head of the table. 44 years old, divine ruler of Japan according to Shinto tradition, son of heaven, living god to 100 million Japanese citizens. But the man sitting at that table looked exhausted, worn, almost broken. The weight of 4 years of total war had transformed him from confident ruler to desperate survivor, watching his nation being systematically destroyed. To the emperor's right sat Prime Minister Kantaro Suzuki, 78 years old, former admiral, brought out of retirement in April to lead Japan through the final crisis. His job was impossible: find a way to end the war without destroying Japan completely. Foreign Minister Shigenori Togo sat beside Suzuki, 62 years old, professional diplomat who had spent decades trying to prevent war with the United States. Failed at prevention, now trying to achieve acceptable peace terms. Failing at that too. War Minister Korechika Anami sat across the table, 58 years old, career army officer, represented the military hardliners who believed Japan should fight to the last man rather than accept unconditional surrender. Would rather see Japan destroyed than dishonored. Navy Minister Mitsumasa Yonai, 65 years old, represented naval forces that had been systematically destroyed by American submarines and carrier aircraft. The Imperial Japanese Navy that had once dominated the Pacific was effectively extinct. Yonai knew this. The army did not want to accept it. Army Chief of Staff Yoshijiro Umezu, 63 years old, represented Imperial Army ground forces who had never been defeated on Japanese home soil. Believed Japan could still win if Americans attempted invasion. Willing to sacrifice entire nation to prove this theory. 6 men, responsibility for 100 million lives. Facing decision that would determine whether Japan survived as a nation or was annihilated completely. The discussion had been ongoing for 3 days. Since July 26th, when the Potsdam Declaration had been issued by the United States, Great Britain and China. The declaration laid out Allied terms for Japanese surrender: unconditional, complete, no negotiations. The declaration threatened Japan with prompt and utter destruction if surrender was not accepted. But it also promised that the Japanese people would not be enslaved or destroyed, that Japan could maintain its existence as a nation, that occupation would be temporary and focused on establishing peaceful democratic government. 3 military hardliners on the council, Anami, Umezu, and Navy Chief of Staff Toyoda, opposed accepting the declaration. They argued Japan should continue fighting, that American invasion could be repelled, that even if Americans landed, Japanese forces would make them pay such terrible price that Americans would eventually accept negotiated peace rather than unconditional surrender. 3 civilian leaders, Suzuki, Togo, and Yonai, favored accepting the declaration. They understood the military situation was hopeless. American forces controlled all approaches to Japan. American bombers destroyed Japanese cities at will. American submarines had cut off all imports. Japan was starving, defeated. Only question was whether Japan would accept defeat while some nation remained, or fight until nothing was left. The council was deadlocked 3-3. Under Japanese law, unanimous consent was required for decisions of this magnitude. The deadlock meant no decision, which meant the war continued. For 3 days, the 6 men had argued, debated, presented evidence, made passionate appeals. Nothing changed. The hardliners would not accept surrender. The civilians would not accept continued war. And while they debated, Japan burned. By August 1945, American strategic bombing had transformed from military operation into systematic destruction of Japanese civilization. B-29 Superfortress bombers flew from bases in the Mariana Islands, Guam, Tinian, Saipan. 3,000 miles round trip to Japan. Longest bombing missions in history, hundreds of bombers, thousands of tons of bombs. Night after night after night, Tokyo had been firebombed in March. 100,000 dead in single night. 16 square miles burned to ash. Worst single air attack in human history up to that point. Osaka, Nagoya, Kobe, Yokohama. Every major Japanese city systematically destroyed by incendiary bombs that created firestorms consuming everything in their path. Japanese cities built primarily from wood and paper, perfect fuel for firestorms. By August, American bombers had run out of major cities to destroy. They had moved on to secondary cities, then tertiary cities, burning towns that most Americans had never heard of. Destroying purely for destruction's sake because there were no more meaningful military targets left. Japan's industrial capacity was 90% destroyed. Its merchant fleet was at the bottom of the Pacific. Its navy was scattered wreckage. Its army was isolated on the home islands with no ability to receive supplies or reinforcements. Japan was defeated. Everyone knew it. The question was not whether Japan would lose, but how Japan would lose. Whether surrender would happen while some nation remained, or whether Americans would continue bombing until Japan ceased to exist as organized society. The Supreme War Council understood this reality. Even the military hardliners understood it. But understanding and accepting were different things. Anami argued that national honor required fighting to the end. That accepting unconditional surrender was worse than extinction. That the Japanese spirit, Yamato Damashi, could overcome material disadvantages. That 100 million Japanese citizens standing together could never be defeated regardless of how many bombs Americans dropped. Togo countered that national honor required protecting the Japanese people. That continuing hopeless war was not brave but criminal. That leaders who sacrificed their people for abstract concepts of honor when no possibility of victory existed were not honorable but insane. The argument went in circles. Had been going in circles for 3 days. Would continue going in circles indefinitely because neither side would yield. Emperor Hirohito listened to both sides, said little. His role was to reign, not to rule. Emperors did not make policy decisions. They ratified decisions made by government and military leaders. But the government was deadlocked. Someone had to break the deadlock, and only the emperor had authority to override unanimous consent requirement. On the morning of August 5th, Hirohito made decision that violated 800 years of imperial tradition. He would use his authority to end the deadlock. He would order surrender regardless of military opposition. But the order could not be issued immediately. Protocol required preparation. Documents had to be drafted, military and civilian officials had to be notified. Communications had to be sent to Allied forces. The formal surrender process would take at least 24 hours to implement properly. 24 hours. One day, 1440 minutes, seemed like plenty of time. Japan had been at war for 4 years. One more day would not matter. Except it would matter. It would matter more than anyone could imagine. While the Supreme War Council debated in Tokyo, a different group of men prepared to end the debate permanently. Tinian Island, Western Pacific, 1,500 miles south of Tokyo. Home to the 509th Composite Group of the United States Army Air Forces. The 509th was unique among American bomber units. It had been formed specifically for single mission, single target, single weapon. Colonel Paul Tibbets commanded the 509th, 30 years old. Veteran bomber pilot with extensive combat experience in Europe and North Africa. Hand-picked by the Manhattan Project to lead the atomic mission. The Manhattan Project. Secret program that had consumed 3 years and $2 billion, developing weapon that could end the war in single blow. Atomic bomb, nuclear fission, power of the sun unleashed on Earth. 2 bombs had been manufactured. Little Boy, Fat Man. Little Boy was uranium-based gun-type weapon. Fat Man was plutonium-based implosion weapon. Different designs, both capable of destroying entire cities. The first atomic test had been conducted on July 16th at Trinity Site in New Mexico. The bomb worked, exceeded expectations, released energy equivalent to 20,000 tons of TNT, created fireball visible for 60 miles, mushroom cloud rising 8 miles high. Project scientists had proven atomic weapons were possible. Now military needed to prove they were practical for combat use, that they could be deployed against real targets under actual combat conditions. President Harry Truman had authorized use of atomic weapons against Japan. The decision was controversial even within American government. Some officials argued atomic weapons were unnecessary because Japan was already defeated. That conventional bombing and naval blockade would force surrender without using revolutionary new weapon. Others argued atomic weapons would save lives, that invading Japan would cost hundreds of thousands of American casualties and millions of Japanese casualties. That using atomic weapons to shock Japan into immediate surrender was merciful compared to prolonged conventional warfare. Truman decided that ending the war quickly justified using atomic weapons. The bombs would be dropped. The question was only when and where. Target Selection Committee had identified multiple potential targets: Hiroshima, Kokura, Niigata, Nagasaki. Kyoto had been on original list, but was removed after Secretary of War Henry Stimson argued that destroying Kyoto, Japan's cultural and spiritual center, would create permanent Japanese hatred that would poison post-war relations. Hiroshima was selected as primary target, city of 350,000 people, major port, military headquarters, industrial center, had been deliberately spared from previous bombing raids so atomic bombs' effects could be clearly assessed. Weather was critical factor. Atomic bomb required visual delivery. Could not be dropped through clouds. Target had to be visible. Mission would proceed only if weather over target was clear. August 6th was selected as attack date. Weather forecasts predicted clear skies over Hiroshima. Backup dates were August 9th, 11th and 14th, if weather or technical problems delayed mission. Tibbets selected his crew carefully. Pilot, co-pilot, navigator, bombardier, flight engineer, radio operator, radar operator, tail gunner, weaponeer, electronic countermeasures operator, scientific observer. 12 men who would deliver humanity's most destructive weapon against city full of civilians. The bomber was specially modified B-29 named Enola Gay after Tibbets's mother. Reinforced bomb bay to handle 10,000-pound weapon. Modified bomb release mechanism. Additional fuel tanks for extended range. Defensive guns removed to save weight. Little Boy was loaded onto Enola Gay during the night of August 5th. Uranium core installed separately as safety precaution. Bomb armed in flight to prevent accidental detonation during takeoff. Mission briefing was conducted at 2300 hours on August 5th. Tibbets explained the mission to his crew, told them they were carrying special weapon, did not specify atomic bomb. did not explain nuclear fission or Manhattan Project. Simply said bomb was extremely powerful and mission was extremely important. The crew understood this was different from normal bombing mission. Security was unprecedented. Entire island was locked down. Nobody allowed to leave, communications restricted. Everyone knew something major was happening. Nobody knew exactly what. At 02:45 hours on August 6th, Enola Gay taxied to runway, loaded with Little Boy atomic bomb, 7,000 gallons of fuel, and 12 men who would change human history. At 02:45, Paul Tibbitt's advanced throttles, 4 Wright R3350 engines produced 9,200 horsepower. Enola Gay accelerated down runway. At 02:45, aircraft lifted off. Mission initiated. Target, Hiroshima. Estimated time to target, 6 hours. Time over target, 08:15. 6 hours to prepare, 6 hours to evacuate, 6 hours to save 350,000 people. Except nobody in Hiroshima knew they needed to evacuate. Nobody knew what was coming. Nobody had any reason to believe August 6th would be different from any other day. Hiroshima woke to beautiful summer morning. Clear blue sky, temperature already climbing toward what would be hot August day. Perfect weather for atomic bomb delivery. The city spread across delta, formed by 7 rivers flowing into Hiroshima Bay. Flat terrain, sea level. Rivers dividing city into distinct districts connected by bridges. 250,000 civilians. 100,000 military personnel stationed at regional headquarters. 350,000 total population. Hiroshima had been fortunate during the war. While Tokyo, Osaka, and other major cities had been devastated by American firebombing, Hiroshima remained largely untouched. Some residents believed city was being preserved for special purpose. Others thought Americans considered Hiroshima culturally significant and were deliberately sparing it. The truth was more prosaic. Hiroshima had been removed from conventional bombing target lists specifically to serve as pristine target for atomic demonstration. American planners wanted city that had not been previously damaged, so atomic bombs' effects could be accurately measured. Hiroshima's survival was not mercy, but planning. Residents went about their morning routines, unaware that their city had been selected for nuclear annihilation. Factory workers reported for shifts at military-industrial plants. Office workers commuted to government buildings. Students walked to schools. Shopkeepers opened stores. Housewives prepared breakfast. Normal, peaceful morning. Like thousands of previous mornings, like mornings should be. At 0700 hours, air raid sirens sounded briefly. Single American B-29 had been detected approaching from the south. Routine reconnaissance flight. Americans flew these missions daily, photographing targets, assessing damage, nothing threatening about single aircraft. The B-29 passed overhead at 32,000 feet, took photographs, reported weather conditions back to base, clear skies, excellent visibility, perfect conditions for mission. This was weather reconnaissance aircraft from 509th Composite Group, confirming that primary target was accessible, green light for strike aircraft. All clear signal sounded at 0731. People returned to normal activities. Some remained outside enjoying beautiful morning. Others went back to breakfast or work. Nobody noticed the 3 B-29s approaching from southeast at 32,000 feet. Nobody thought 3 aircraft represented significant threat. Americans had been sending small bomber formations over Japan for months without dropping bombs. Probably more reconnaissance. Probably more photographs, nothing to worry about. Takeshi Nakamura arrived at Hiroshima Communications Center at 0600 hours, beginning his shift 2 hours before anyone else because that was his habit. He enjoyed quiet morning time when the office was empty and he could work without interruption. The communications center occupied second floor of concrete building near city center. Telegraph equipment, radio transmitters, telephone switchboards. Hub for all long-distance communications entering or leaving Hiroshima. Takeshi had worked here for 11 years, since age 15 when he completed telegraph training. He was senior operator now, supervisor of 6 junior operators who handled routine traffic. Takeshi handled priority messages. Emergency communications. Anything important. He was proud of his work, took it seriously. Telegraph operators were vital to war effort. They connected military units across Japan, transmitted orders, received intelligence, maintained communications network that kept Japanese forces coordinated despite American naval blockade, preventing physical transport. This morning was routine, military supply reports from units in Western Japan. Troop movement notifications, logistics updates. Boring but necessary. Takeshi transcribed each message carefully. Accuracy was critical. Single error in coded message could cause catastrophic miscommunication. At 07:45, Tokyo headquarters began transmitting emergency priority message. Takeshi recognized the signal pattern immediately. Emergency priority was reserved for most critical communications. Battle reports, strategic decisions. Orders from Imperial headquarters requiring immediate implementation. He positioned his pencil over message form, began transcribing incoming Morse code. Click, click, click. Letters forming words, words forming sentences. Message revealing itself character by character. From Imperial headquarters, Tokyo to all stations. Western Command, priority, immediate classification. Secret highest. Takeshi's attention sharpened. Secret highest classification. He had never seen that before. Even during most desperate phases of war, messages rarely exceeded normal secret classification. Whatever this message contained was extraordinarily important. His pencil continued transcribing, Morse code translating to Japanese characters, characters forming meaning that seemed impossible. Emperor accepts Allied surrender terms. War ends effective immediately. Cease all hostilities nationwide. Transmit to all subordinate units. Broadcast to civilian population. Implement surrender protocols. Takeshi stared at the message, read it 3 times, checking for errors, wondering if he had misunderstood the code. But there was no error. The message was clear. Japan had surrendered. The war was over. Emperor Hirohito had accepted Allied terms. All fighting would cease immediately. Takeshi checked his watch. 08:14. Message reception complete at 08:14 and 30 seconds. His hand reached for the broadcast switch. Standard procedure for priority messages was to retransmit immediately to all subordinate stations. Hiroshima Communications Center served as relay hub for Western Japan. His responsibility was to ensure this message reached every military unit and civilian authority in the region. The switch was 10 inches from his hand. 3 seconds to flip it. 3 seconds to transmit surrender announcement to 38 stations covering Western Japan. 3 seconds to inform hundreds of thousands of people that the war had ended. Takeshi's fingers touched the switch, and then the sky turned white. Enola Gay released Little Boy at 31,600 feet above Hiroshima. Bombardier Tom Ferriby had perfect visibility, no clouds, no haze. Clear view of Aioi Bridge, the distinctive T-shaped bridge, selected as aiming point because its unique shape was easy to identify from 6 miles altitude. Ferriby triggered bomb release at precisely 08:15 and 17 seconds. Little Boy dropped away from aircraft, falling towards city below. 43 seconds to detonation. Paul Tibbets immediately banked Enola Gay into violent evasive turn. 155-degree diving turn designed to put maximum distance between aircraft and explosion. At atomic bomb's estimated yield, anything within 10 miles of ground zero would be exposed to dangerous radiation and blast effects. Little Boy fell through atmosphere, internal barometric sensors measuring altitude, triggering mechanism armed at 7,000 feet, safety interlocks releasing, weapon becoming fully operational. At 1,800 feet above Hiroshima, proximity fuses determined optimal detonation altitude had been reached. Firing signal sent to gun mechanism. Subcritical mass of uranium-235 fired down gun barrel into second subcritical mass. 2 pieces combining to form single supercritical mass. Nuclear chain reaction initiated. Uranium nuclei splitting. Releasing neutrons. Neutrons striking other uranium nuclei, causing additional fission events, each fission releasing energy and more neutrons. process multiplying exponentially. One fission becoming 2, becoming 4, becoming 8, doubling every 10 nanoseconds. Within 1 microsecond, chain reaction involved 10 billion trillion uranium nuclei. Energy release equivalent to 15,000 tons of TNT. Contained within sphere, roughly the size of baseball. Temperature at core of fireball reached 10 million degrees Celsius. Hotter than center of the sun. Everything within 1 kilometer vaporized instantly. Humans, buildings, streets, trees, converted to plasma in fraction of second. Blast wave expanded outward at twice the speed of sound. Overpressure of 20 pounds per square inch at 1 kilometer radius. Enough to destroy reinforced concrete buildings. Enough to turn human bodies into fragments. Thermal radiation traveled at speed of light. Everything within 2 kilometers exposed to heat equivalent to being inside blast furnace. Skin carbonized, clothing ignited, wood burst into flames, metal melted. The fireball rose, cooling slightly, still hot enough to ignite everything it touched, creating updraft that sucked air inward toward center. Air heated to thousands of degrees, rising rapidly, forming characteristic mushroom shape as hot gases punched through cooler atmosphere above. Within 90 seconds, 140,000 people were dead or dying, half the city destroyed. Everything within 1.6 kilometers of ground zero completely obliterated. And in the telegraph office, Takeshi Nakamura's hand remained frozen inches from the broadcast switch, the message announcing the end of the war still on his desk. Never transmitted, never received by the 38 stations waiting for his relay. The telegram had arrived 90 seconds too late to matter. The bomb detonated directly above Shima Surgical Clinic. Dr. Kaoru Shima had been preparing for morning surgery, scheduled to remove appendix from 16-year-old patient. Routine operation he had performed hundreds of times. Dr. Shima ceased to exist at 08:15 and 17 seconds, vaporized by temperature exceeding 10 million degrees. No body recovered, no remains identified. Simply erased from existence. His clinic was at the hypocenter, directly beneath detonation point. The building, its contents, its staff, its patients, all converted to plasma within first microsecond of explosion. Within 100 meters of hypocenter, same fate befell approximately 8,000 people, walking to work, shopping at market, waiting for streetcars, living final seconds of normal existence before being instantaneously deleted from physical reality. At 200 meters, people did not vaporize. Instead, they burned. Thermal flash ignited clothing. Skin blistered and charred. Eyes melted. Bodies fell as carbonized husks that would crumble when touched. Bank employee sat at desk, working on morning paperwork. Flash of light, intense pain, looked down to see his hands burning. Skin peeling off in sheets, tried to stand. Fell. Never stood again. Died 3 hours later from thermal burns covering 90% of body. At 500 meters, people survived the initial flash, but not the blast wave. Overpressure of 20 pounds per square inch arrived 2 seconds after thermal radiation. Buildings collapsed. Walls became shrapnel. Concrete and steel and wood transformed into projectiles traveling hundreds of miles per hour. Streetcar full of commuters heading to work. Thermal flash through windows burned passengers on side-facing explosion. Blast wave arrived. Streetcar tumbled end over end. Crushed. Passengers killed by impact. Survivors trapped in wreckage as fires approached. At 1 kilometer, survival became possible. Barely. Thermal radiation caused severe burns, but not always fatal. Blast wave destroyed wooden buildings, but some concrete structures remained standing. People could survive if they were inside reinforced buildings or happened to be shielded when flash occurred. Schoolgirl walking to class. Heard roar. Looked up. Saw white light. Fell unconscious. Woke hours later under pile of rubble. Burned. Bleeding. Trapped. Screamed for help. Nobody came. Died from injuries and dehydration 3 days later. Body found weeks afterward when rubble was cleared. At 2 kilometers, people survived in significant numbers. Buildings were damaged, but often remained standing. Burns were painful, but treatable. Blast wave caused injuries, but not always death. Survivors could function, could help others, could comprehend what had happened. But comprehension was difficult. Nobody understood what they had experienced. Giant explosion, unlike anything in human experience. Flash brighter than sun, blast stronger than anything conventional explosives could produce. Mushroom cloud rising miles into sky. Some thought meteor had struck city. Others believed Americans had dropped new type of bomb. Many thought multiple bombs had been dropped because destruction was so widespread. Nobody immediately understood that single weapon had destroyed entire city. And nobody knew that in the telegraph office near city center, a message announcing the war's end sat on desk next to dead telegraph operator who had been killed before he could transmit it. Survivors stumbled through burning ruins trying to understand what had happened. The lucky ones had been inside reinforced concrete buildings or shielded by terrain features when the blast occurred. The unlucky were burned, blinded, trapped under rubble, or dying from radiation exposure they did not yet understand. Fires spread across the city. Thermal radiation had ignited every combustible material within 2 kilometers. Wood, paper, cloth, oil, gasoline. Individual fires merged into massive firestorm, similar to those that had consumed Tokyo and other Japanese cities during conventional firebombing raids. But this firestorm was different. It had been created in seconds rather than hours. There had been no warning, no air raid sirens giving people time to reach shelters, no gradual approach allowing fire crews to prepare. Just instantaneous transformation from normal morning to apocalypse. Hiroshima's fire departments had been largely destroyed. Fire stations within 1 kilometer of ground zero were obliterated. Fire trucks were crushed or burned. Firefighters were dead. Water mains were broken by blast wave, making fire suppression impossible even if equipment had survived. Civilians fought fires with buckets and blankets. Futile effort against flames that consumed city blocks in minutes. People gave up trying to save buildings, focused instead on saving each other. Rescue efforts were chaotic. Medical facilities near city center were destroyed. Hospitals farther from ground zero were overwhelmed within hours by thousands of injured streaming in from devastated areas. Doctors and nurses worked without adequate supplies, without electricity, often without proper facilities as their own hospitals caught fire. Injuries were unlike anything medical staff had seen before, burns covering entire bodies, flash burns that had instantly charred skin without igniting clothing, radiation effects that nobody recognized as radiation because radiation sickness was not yet understood by Japanese medicine. Victims vomited, bled from nose and mouth, lost hair, developed strange purple spots on skin, appeared to recover initially, then suddenly died days later from no apparent cause. Doctors were baffled. They had no treatment protocols because nobody knew what radiation sickness was or how to treat it. Military units stationed outside immediate blast zone attempted rescue operations. Soldiers pulled survivors from rubble, established first aid stations, organized evacuation of seriously injured to hospitals outside city. But the scale of disaster exceeded any possible response capacity. Regional military headquarters at Hiroshima Castle had been destroyed. Blast wave had collapsed the castle's walls. Fire had consumed wooden structures. Communications were severed. Chain of command was broken. Local military forces had no orders, no coordination, no ability to contact higher headquarters for instructions. And throughout all this chaos, nobody knew about the telegram. The message announcing the war's end sat on desk in destroyed telegraph office. Takeshi Nakamura's body lay nearby, killed by blast wave that had collapsed building. The message that could have saved the city had arrived just 90 seconds before the bomb detonated. News of Hiroshima's destruction reached Tokyo through military communication channels approximately 3 hours after the bombing. Initial reports were confused and contradictory. Some said entire city had been destroyed by single bomb. Others reported multiple bombs or massive conventional raid. Nobody had clear picture of what actually happened. The Supreme War Council reconvened at 1500 hours on August 6th. Same 6 men who had been deadlocked for 3 days. Same underground bunker, but now facing new reality that potentially changed everything. Foreign Minister Togo reported what was known. Hiroshima had been attacked at approximately 08:15. Single American bomber had dropped single bomb. Entire city center had been destroyed. Casualties estimated in tens of thousands at minimum, possibly over 100,000. Exact numbers unknown because communications with Hiroshima had been severed. Initial analysis suggested this was the atomic weapon that Allied intelligence had warned about. American scientists had been working on nuclear weapons for years. Japanese intelligence had monitored the Manhattan Project, had known Americans were attempting to develop atomic bombs, had not known whether Americans had succeeded or when such weapons might be ready for combat use. Now they knew. Americans had functional atomic weapon, had used it against Japanese city, demonstrated capability to destroy entire cities with single bombs. Togo argued this changed the strategic situation completely. If Americans could destroy Japanese cities at will with single aircraft carrying single bombs, then Japan's defensive strategy was obsolete. No fighter defenses could guarantee stopping all bombers. No air raid shelters could protect against atomic weapons. No civilian evacuation could save populations when entire cities could be destroyed without warning. Immediate surrender was now only rational option. Continuing war meant systematic atomic annihilation of every Japanese city. Entire nation could be destroyed in weeks. War Minister Anami disagreed, argued that Americans could not possibly have many atomic bombs. Manhattan Project had consumed enormous resources. Each bomb must be incredibly expensive to produce. Americans might have 2 or 3 bombs, maybe 5, but not dozens. Not enough to destroy all of Japan. Therefore, Japan should continue fighting. Absorb a few more atomic attacks if necessary, but maintain resistance until Americans exhausted their atomic arsenal. Then conventional Japanese defenses might still repel invasion. Anami also argued that accepting surrender immediately after atomic attack would appear to be capitulation driven by fear. Japan would lose face. Better to endure additional attacks stoically, demonstrating Japanese courage, then negotiate surrender from position of demonstrated strength rather than obvious weakness. The argument resumed. Same positions, same deadlock. Atomic bomb had not broken military hardliners' determination to continue fighting, but Emperor Hirohito had already decided. Previous evening he had authorized surrender. Atomic bomb simply reinforced decision already made. The formal surrender process would proceed as planned, regardless of military opposition. Imperial rescript announcing surrender was being prepared. Would be recorded on August 15th. Broadcast to nation. War would end. Military hardliners could object all they wanted, but Emperor had spoken. In Japan's governmental system, that ended discussion. Except the formal process required 9 more days. 9 days for documents to be drafted and reviewed. 9 days for proper protocols to be followed. 9 days for military and civilian officials throughout Japan to be notified. 9 days seemed reasonable. Japan had endured 4 years of war. 9 more days would not significantly change anything, except it would change everything, because in 9 days, 100,000 more people would die. Weather over Kokura. The primary target for the second atomic mission was poor on August 9th. Clouds obscured the city. Visual bombing was impossible. Major Charles Sweeney, commanding the B-29 boxcar carrying Fat Man plutonium bomb, diverted to secondary target, Nagasaki. Nagasaki was port city on Kyushu Island. 240,000 population, major shipbuilding center, home to Mitsubishi Heavy Industries facilities producing warships and weapons for Japanese military. Like Hiroshima, Nagasaki had been deliberately spared from conventional bombing to serve as pristine target for atomic demonstration. Unlike Hiroshima, which was relatively flat, Nagasaki was built on hills and valleys that channeled blast effects. Sweeney reached Nagasaki at 11:02 hours. Found breaks in clouds over northern portion of city. Bombardier Captain Kermit Behan identified visual aiming point through gap in clouds. Released Fat Man at 11:02. Fat Man detonated at 1,600 feet above Urakami Valley district of Nagasaki. Yield approximately 21 kilotons, 40% more powerful than Little Boy that had destroyed Hiroshima. But geography limited damage. Hills surrounding Urakami Valley contained blast effects, shielded southern portion of Nagasaki from worse destruction. Casualties were 70,000 killed immediately instead of 140,000 in Hiroshima. Still 70,000 dead. 70,000 people who died after Japan had already decided to surrender. Who died because formal surrender process required 9 days to complete properly. And still the telegram sat undelivered in Hiroshima, the message that had arrived 90 seconds too late to save that city. The message that might have prevented Nagasaki entirely if it had been sent 24 hours earlier. If protocols had moved faster, if emergency priority had meant transmitting immediately rather than waiting for proper procedures. But protocols existed for reasons. Military communications required verification. Orders had to be confirmed authentic. Chain of command had to be respected. You could not simply transmit message claiming Emperor had ordered surrender without verifying the message was genuine and authorized. Except 90 seconds had made the difference between city saved and city destroyed. And 9 days would make the difference between 70,000 living and 70,000 dead. The mathematics of war measured in seconds and minutes, where timing was everything, where protocols designed to ensure accuracy cost lives that speed might have saved. Emperor Hirohito's recorded surrender announcement was broadcast at noon on August 15, 1945, 9 days after Hiroshima, 6 days after Nagasaki, 210,000 people dead from atomic bombs alone. The recording was first time most Japanese citizens had ever heard their emperor's voice, divine ruler speaking directly to his people, explaining in formal court language that the war was over, that Japan accepted Allied terms, that citizens should endure the unendurable and bear the unbearable. Most Japanese civilians listened with mixed emotions: relief that the war was finally ending, grief for the losses suffered, shame that Japan had been defeated, uncertainty about what occupation and reconstruction would bring. Military hardliners reacted with rage. Some attempted coup to prevent surrender announcement, failed because Emperor's authority was absolute once he had spoken. Others committed suicide rather than accepting defeat. Many simply refused to believe Japan could be defeated and continued fighting for weeks or months until forcibly disarmed by Allied occupation forces. But the war was over, officially ended. No more atomic bombs, no more firebombing, no more naval bombardment, no more killing, except 210,000 people had already died unnecessarily, died because surrender came too late, because bureaucracy moved slowly, because proper procedures took time, because emergencies were managed through protocols designed for normal situations. And in Hiroshima, investigators sifting through wreckage of communications center found Takeshi Nakamura's body, found the telegram announcing surrender, the message that had been received at 0814. That would have been transmitted if Takeshi had lived 90 more seconds. That would have informed Western Japan the war was over 9 days earlier than official surrender announcement. That might have changed everything if timing had been just slightly different. Allied occupation forces reached Hiroshima in late August. Military officers, medical personnel, photographers and journalists documenting the destruction. Scientists measuring radiation levels and studying bomb effects. Among the investigators was Major John Campbell, military intelligence officer tasked with analyzing Japanese communications systems and determining what information Japanese military had possessed about Allied intentions. Campbell's team examined surviving Japanese military facilities, captured documents, interviewed survivors who had worked in communications or intelligence roles, trying to understand Japanese decision-making process that had prolonged war for months after defeat was inevitable. At Hiroshima Communications Center, Campbell found the telegram, partially burned but readable, authenticated by surviving military personnel as genuine emergency priority message from Imperial headquarters. Time-stamped 0814 on August 6th. Campbell showed the document to his superior officers. They confirmed authentication. This was genuine surrender order transmitted from Tokyo 9 days before official announcement. Received in Hiroshima 90 seconds before atomic bomb detonated. The implications were staggering. If this message had been transmitted to other stations in Western Japan, thousands of military personnel would have known the war was ending. News would have spread. Civilian populations would have learned. Pressure for immediate formal surrender would have been enormous. Possible, though not certain, that formal surrender announcement would have been accelerated. That Emperor's recorded speech would have been broadcast on August 6th or 7th instead of August 15th. That Nagasaki bombing might have been cancelled. That 70,000 lives might have been saved. Equally possible that telegram would have made no difference. That military hardliners would have dismissed it as forgery or unauthorized communication. That formal surrender process would have proceeded on same timeline regardless. Impossible to know, impossible to prove what would have happened differently. Just cruel knowledge that message existed, that it had been received, that one telegraph operator had been 90 seconds away from transmitting it when atomic bomb killed him. Campbell wrote detailed report documenting the telegram's existence and significance. Submitted report through proper channels to military headquarters in Tokyo. Report was classified secret and filed in archives where it remained for decades. American military did not publicize the telegram's existence. Doing so would have raised uncomfortable questions about whether more careful timing might have prevented one or both atomic bombings. Whether communication with Japanese government before bombing could have achieved surrender without demonstrating atomic weapons' destructive power on civilian populations. Japanese government also did not publicize the telegram. Doing so would have raised different uncomfortable questions about whether Japanese leadership's slow decision-making process had unnecessarily prolonged war, whether bureaucratic protocols had prevented earlier surrender that might have saved cities. The telegram became classified secret, known to a handful of investigators, discussed in classified reports, never released publicly, never explained to families of Hiroshima and Nagasaki victims who died unnecessarily because message arrived 90 seconds too late. Takeshi Nakamura's wife, Yuki, was 30 kilometers from Hiroshima when the bomb detonated. She was visiting her parents in rural village outside the city, had traveled the previous day to help her elderly mother who had fallen ill. Yuki heard strange rumor on August 6th. People said Hiroshima had been destroyed, completely destroyed, by single bomb. Impossible rumor, nobody believed it. Cities were not destroyed by single bombs, but as more refugees fled the city, rumors became confirmed facts. Something terrible had happened. Hiroshima was burning, thousands were dead, communications were severed. Yuki tried to return to city to find Takeshi. Roads were blocked. Military checkpoints prevented civilians from entering devastated area. She waited 3 days before finally being permitted to enter ruins. What she found defied comprehension. The city she knew no longer existed, replaced by wasteland of ash and rubble. Fires still burning in some areas, bodies everywhere. Survivors stumbling through devastation, looking for family members who would never be found. Yuki went to communication center where Takeshi worked. Building had collapsed. Nothing recognizable remained. She searched for 2 days. Asked survivors if anyone had seen Takeshi. Nobody had information. Finally, military recovery teams began processing bodies from government buildings. Yuki was taken to temporary morgue, shown bodies that had been found at communication center, asked to identify her husband. She recognized Takeshi by his wedding ring. Nothing else was recognizable. Burns and blast trauma had rendered him unidentifiable by appearance. But the ring was distinctive. She had given it to him on their wedding day 8 years earlier. Yuki broke down, uncontrollable grief that she could not express publicly because Japanese culture demanded stoic acceptance of fate. She cried privately, mourned privately, burned with rage privately at Americans who had killed her husband. At war that had destroyed her life, at fate that had taken Takeshi when he was just doing his job at his desk. Military officials came to her 1 week later, explained that they were investigating circumstances surrounding the bombing. Asked if she knew what Takeshi had been doing when bomb detonated. Yuki had no information. She knew Takeshi was telegraph operator, knew he worked receiving and transmitting military communications, but she did not know specifics of his work. Military secrecy prevented him from discussing details with family. Officials showed her the telegram, explained that this message had been received by Takeshi approximately 90 seconds before bomb detonated. that Takeshi had been in process of transmitting this message when he was killed, that if he had lived 90 more seconds, Western Japan would have been informed that war was ending. The officials asked if Yuki wanted to make statement about the telegram, whether she believed its existence should be publicized. Yuki refused. Publicizing telegram would have made Takeshi's death nationally significant, would have transformed him from anonymous victim into symbol, would have meant endless interviews, endless questions, endless reliving of worst day of her life. She wanted to mourn privately, wanted to remember Takeshi as her husband, not as the telegraph operator who almost transmitted the message that might have prevented second atomic bombing, wanted her grief to remain personal rather than becoming public property. Officials respected her wishes. The telegram remained classified. Takeshi remained anonymous casualty, one of 140,000 dead at Hiroshima. Yuki lived another 43 years. Never remarried, never had children. Worked as seamstress supporting herself and her aging parents. Died in 1988 at age 71 from stomach cancer possibly related to radiation exposure from visiting Hiroshima immediately after bombing. She never spoke publicly about the telegram. Never discussed Takeshi's role, carried knowledge privately until her death. The secret of the message that came 90 seconds too late. Dr. Robert Oppenheimer directed the Manhattan Project, led team of scientists who developed atomic bomb, witnessed Trinity test, reportedly quoted Hindu scripture upon seeing first atomic explosion. Now I am become death, destroyer of worlds. Oppenheimer learned about Hiroshima bombing while still at Los Alamos Laboratory. Initial reaction was elation. The weapon worked, years of effort validated, mission accomplished. Then casualty estimates began arriving. Initial reports suggested 50,000 dead, then 100,000. Eventually, 140,000. Single weapon had killed more people than any single military action in human history. Oppenheimer's elation transformed to horror. What had they created? What had they unleashed? Nuclear weapons were not just bigger bombs. They were a different category of destruction entirely. Weapons that could annihilate cities, that could end civilization. That had transformed war from activity with rules and limits into potential extinction event. After Japan surrendered, Oppenheimer met with President Truman, expressed concerns about atomic weapons implications. Reportedly told Truman he felt he had blood on his hands. Truman was unsympathetic. Told Oppenheimer not to be melodramatic, that scientists' role was developing weapons. Political leaders' role was deciding when and how to use them. That Oppenheimer bore no responsibility for deaths in Hiroshima and Nagasaki because he had not made decision to use bombs. But Oppenheimer could not absolve himself so easily. He had built the bombs. His scientific genius had made them possible. Thousands of scientists and engineers had contributed, but Oppenheimer had directed the effort. Without his leadership, Manhattan Project might have failed or been delayed long enough that war ended before bombs were ready. Years later, Oppenheimer learned about the telegram. Classified report describing message received at Hiroshima 90 seconds before bombing. Message announcing Japan's surrender. Message that might have prevented one or both atomic bombings if it had been sent earlier or transmitted faster. The knowledge tormented him. 90 seconds. 90 seconds between message arriving and city being destroyed. What if message had been sent 24 hours earlier? What if Japanese bureaucracy had moved faster? What if telegraph operator had transmitted immediately instead of following proper protocols? Could atomic bombings have been avoided entirely? Could 210,000 lives have been saved? Could humanity's entry into atomic age have been managed differently? Oppenheimer knew these questions were unanswerable. History did not provide alternative timelines. Could not replay August 1945 with different timing or different decisions. What happened, happened. Regretting it was pointless, but he regretted it anyway. Carried guilt for rest of his life. Not just guilt for building atomic bombs, but guilt for all the circumstances, timing, communications, political decisions that had resulted in those bombs being used against civilian populations when surrender might have been achievable through other means. In 1954, Oppenheimer's security clearance was revoked during Red Scare investigations. He was accused of having communist sympathies. of being security risk. Really, he was being punished for opposing hydrogen bomb development and for expressing moral concerns about nuclear weapons. He spent his final years as physics professor at Princeton, continued teaching and research, never returned to weapons work, died in 1967 at age 62 from throat cancer, possibly related to chain smoking that had started during Manhattan Project's stressful years. Before his death, Oppenheimer gave series of interviews about Manhattan Project and its aftermath. In one interview, he was asked whether he regretted building an atomic bomb. His answer was complex. He did not regret the scientific achievement. Creating an atomic bomb required solving problems at frontier of physics and engineering. The accomplishment was extraordinary regardless of applications. But he deeply regretted how bombs were used, believed that demonstration on uninhabited island might have convinced Japan to surrender without killing civilians, that more aggressive diplomatic efforts before bombing might have achieved same result, that atomic age could have begun differently if decisions had been made more carefully, and he regretted the timing. The cruel coincidence that Japan's surrender decision had been made hours before Hiroshima bombing, but not implemented quickly enough to prevent it. The 90 seconds that separated message from destruction, 90 seconds that haunted him until his death. Colonel Paul Tibbets piloted Enola Gay on Hiroshima mission. Dropped atomic bomb that killed 140,000 people. Never expressed regret. Never apologized. Maintained until his death in 2007 that atomic bombings were justified and necessary. Tibbets' argument was straightforward. Japan refused to surrender despite being obviously defeated. American military was planning invasion of Japanese home islands scheduled for November 1945. Invasion would have cost hundreds of thousands of American casualties and millions of Japanese casualties. Atomic bombs shocked Japan into immediate surrender. Avoided invasion, saved net lives despite horrific immediate casualties. Harsh calculation, but correct calculation. 210,000 died from atomic bombs, but millions were saved by preventing invasion. Therefore, using atomic bombs was not just justified, but morally required. Failing to use weapons that could end war quickly would have been criminal. Would have meant choosing prolonged conventional warfare that killed more people simply to avoid using weapon that seemed too powerful. Tibbets gave hundreds of interviews over his 62-year post-war life. Spoke at schools, military academies, veteran events. Always defended atomic bombings. Always argued decision was correct. He never learned about the telegram. Information remained classified throughout his lifetime. He died believing Japan would never have surrendered without atomic demonstrations. That diplomatic options had been exhausted. That only overwhelming force could convince Japanese military to accept defeat. If he had known about telegram received 90 seconds before Hiroshima bombing, about surrender decision made before bombing but not implemented quickly enough, about possibility that more patient diplomacy might have achieved surrender without atomic weapons, would knowledge have changed his opinion? Would he have regretted Hiroshima mission? Would he have acknowledged that timing and communication failures, rather than military necessity, determined when and whether atomic bombs were used? Impossible to know. Tibbets died believing he had done right thing, believing atomic bombs saved more lives than they cost, believing history vindicated decision to use humanity's most destructive weapons against civilian populations. History is more ambiguous. Atomic bombs did end war quickly, did prevent invasion, did save lives that would have been lost in prolonged conventional warfare. But they also killed 210,000 people, introduced nuclear weapons to warfare, started arms race that brought humanity repeatedly to edge of extinction during Cold War, created precedent for using weapons of mass destruction that still threatens civilization, and they killed people who might have been saved if surrender decision had been communicated earlier, if diplomatic channels had been more aggressive, if 90 seconds had made different outcome. The telegram sits in archives, classified document, proof that timing mattered, that small differences in communication and decision-making could have changed everything, that history's most destructive weapons were used against cities at moment when war was already ending, not because military necessity required it, but because bureaucracy moved slowly, because proper procedures took time, because emergency priority message arrived 90 seconds too late to matter. The telegram was declassified in 1995, 50 years after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, released as part of broader declassification of World War II documents. American historians discovered it first, recognized its significance immediately, published papers arguing that atomic bombings might have been prevented if Japanese surrender decision had been communicated more effectively. That 90-second delay between message reception and atomic detonation illustrated cruel roll timing played in historical outcomes. Japanese historians confirmed authentication, verified that telegram was genuine emergency priority communication from imperial headquarters, that Takeshi Nakamura had indeed received message announcing surrender 90 seconds before bomb detonated. Debate erupted. Some historians argued telegram proved atomic bombings were unnecessary, that Japan was already surrendering when bombs were dropped, that American military rushed to use atomic weapons before Japan could surrender conventionally because military wanted to demonstrate weapons power and justify Manhattan Project's enormous cost. Other historians argued telegram's existence did not change fundamental calculation, that one message received 90 seconds before bombing did not constitute official surrender, that even if message had been transmitted throughout Japan, military hardliners would have rejected it as unauthorized. That formal surrender process still would have required weeks to complete properly. The debate continues, will probably never be resolved, because history does not provide controlled experiments, cannot replay August 1945 with different timing to determine what would have happened differently. What is known for certain is that timing mattered. That 90 seconds made difference between message transmitted and message never transmitted. That small delays in bureaucratic processes can have catastrophic consequences. That emergencies require emergency responses, not normal procedural compliance. Hiroshima Peace Memorial Museum displays the telegram, protected behind glass, labeled with full explanation of its significance. Visitors can read the actual message, see Takeshi Nakamura's photograph, understand that he died 90 seconds before transmitting announcement that war was ending. The display is most visited exhibit in museum. People stand reading the telegram for minutes, silent, processing implications, understanding that individual humans, Takeshi, the emperor, American pilots, Japanese commanders, made decisions that determined who lived and who died. That history is not inevitable, is not predetermined, is created by people making choices under time pressure without perfect information, that those choices have consequences that ripple forward for generations. That 90 seconds can matter more than 4 years of war. The telegram reminds us that emergencies are not managed through normal procedures, that priority communications require immediate action, that protocols designed for peacetime can be catastrophically inadequate during crisis, that if message says emergency priority, you transmit it immediately. You do not wait for verification. Do not follow standard procedures. Do not assume you have time to handle it properly because you might have 90 seconds instead of 90 minutes. The telegram reminds us that timing is everything, that being almost on time is same as being infinitely late when consequences are measured in hundreds of thousands of lives. That history's most important moments are often separated by seconds or minutes rather than days or years. That small delays in critical decisions create disproportionate outcomes, that we should never assume we have more time than we actually have. 140,000 people died at Hiroshima. 70,000 died at Nagasaki. 210,000 total dead from atomic bombs. How many of those deaths were necessary? How many could have been prevented if timing had been different? If surrender decision had been communicated earlier? If diplomatic channels had been more aggressive? If emergency priority message had been sent 24 hours earlier? Nobody knows, cannot know. History does not reveal what might have been. What we know is that message announcing Japan's surrender was received in Hiroshima 90 seconds before atomic bomb detonated. That telegraph operator Takeshi Nakamura died with his hand reaching toward broadcast switch that would have transmitted this message throughout Western Japan. That if he had lived 90 more seconds, thousands of people would have known war was ending. That knowledge might have changed subsequent events, might have accelerated formal surrender, might have prevented Nagasaki, or might have changed nothing. Message might have been dismissed. Formal surrender might have proceeded on same timeline. 70,000 people might have died regardless. We do not know, cannot know, must live with uncertainty about whether history could have been different if timing had been slightly better. What we can know is that timing mattered, that small differences in communication and decision-making have enormous consequences, that emergencies require emergency responses, that protocols designed for normal situations can be catastrophically inadequate during crises, that 90 seconds separated message from destruction, that one telegraph operator died reaching for switch that might have saved cities, that the telegram came too late, not by hours, not by days, by 90 seconds, and 140,000 people died because those 90 seconds made all the difference. Remember Takeshi Nakamura, telegraph operator who received message announcing the end of war 90 seconds before atomic bomb killed him. Remember that he tried. His hand reached for broadcast switch. He was doing his job, following his training, attempting to transmit emergency priority message immediately upon receiving it. He did everything right, and died anyway because timing is cruel and history's most important moments are often separated by seconds. Remember that small delays in critical decisions have enormous consequences. That emergency priority means transmit immediately. That protocols exist for normal situations, but emergencies require different thinking. Remember that war's greatest tragedies are often measured not in grand strategic failures, but in tiny differences in timing, in messages that arrive seconds too late, in decisions that are made hours too slowly, in communications that are delayed by bureaucratic procedures designed for peacetime. Remember the telegram that came 90 seconds too late. Remember that 140,000 people died unnecessarily because proper procedures required time that nobody had. Remember that history is created by people making decisions under pressure without perfect information, that those decisions matter, that timing matters, that 90 seconds can mean the difference between city saved and city destroyed. Remember, learn, do better next time. Because there will be a next time. There is always a next time. Emergency situations where seconds matter, where proper procedures conflict with urgent necessity, where normal communication channels are too slow. When that next time comes, remember the telegram. Remember Takeshi Nakamura reaching for broadcast switch 90 seconds too late. Remember that emergency priority means transmit immediately. Remember that timing is everything.